Hey everyone, just finishing up the Asian Cultures Taoism as a Living Tradition, Dr. David Mazina from Boston College, visiting here at the Berea College campus, April 4th. And my son has made a comment. He said, in passing, he said, "I can't believe that the man, the priest, the Taoist priest can transform his body, and in so transforming his body, gain powers over these martial spirits." And I said, well, can you believe it? And how does it work? Do you believe that it's all a hoax, essentially? I mean, I'm not summarizing what I said to Orion, but or do you believe it's all happening like Harry Potter, or is it somewhere in between? And he said he thinks that it's all happening for real. So we're trying to step through now the reasoning behind it. Now, I made the point, and this is incredibly important when you see, it's like Aussie Man released a video about force fields, and it was that video where the man's doing all this stuff, and some of the people believe it, and they participate, and then he like runs over the woman and totally knocks her out cold. And it's just obvious that the guy is, fake. However, that doesn't mean that there's no such thing as chi. It just means this guy is not really efficacious at it, right? So the question that we establish is, how do we, if there is a science or technology hidden in these ritual Taoist traditions, how do we discover it and then make use of it? So we're going to start with how do we determine it's real? Well, for one thing, it may be true that people in the country are more naive and can be bamboozled and less savvy. That's, as the saying goes, country mouse versus city mouse. It may also be true that religious people tend to be more superstitious. I haven't found that to be true. I found that their superstitions are different. But it may be said religiously that country people are more superstitious. And therefore, things are more likely to work for the people if they believe in it. This is obviously the case. But it may also be said that generally speaking, people are idiots everywhere, or they're geniuses everywhere. There is no higher concentration of intelligence in one region versus another region overall. How the culture uses intelligence, encourages intelligence, or discourages intelligence and wisdom is going to be highly selective, and it's going to be specific, region-specific and culture-specific. But as a general rule, people such as skeptics are going to exist in every culture. There's going to be people that doubt things in every culture, every situation. If you go to a church, inside the church there's going to be people sitting there thinking that it's all a load of malarkey. So how do we know that as a living tradition that there is something going on in these Taoist ritual traditions? Well, because there's efficacy. There is achievement happening, because if achievement is not occurring, the people will run them out. They'll say, no, maybe you are possessed and you can't help me, or maybe you've stolen your lineage, but bad luck follows you everywhere, and we don't want to hire you anymore. So by the rule of evolutionary progress, the more successful lineages overall that are able to pass on their traditions and have the most potent traditions are going to be the ones that tend to live the longest, discounting any war factors, or the entire village starves to death. In general, whatever you're finding in China will be now the most technologically proficient and savvy traditions they were so good that despite the Cultural Revolution, the masters were able to hide themselves even in plain sight, or they were able to protect their liturgical traditions and keep alive these technologies. So we have to assume that on some level something is happening. So the question then leads to how and what and why can we make use of these in our modern world? And I've been mulling over this subject for some time because I find it interesting that some people can experience chi in the clinic, some people can experience chi, and some people really struggle with it. Now, because I use the breath work and I lean on people come in, they're usually a little bit desperate by the time they come into Chinese medicine. And so I can lean on their desire to be successful to get them to do the breathing most of the time. There are some people that are just absolutely not going to do the breath work, and they're closed off. Their wife has made them come in, or their husband, but usually their wife. If it's a woman, it's usually a doctor has told them to come in because they don't have anything else to do. And by then, it's very difficult to get them to open the channels for the chi. So why is it that some people can experience something and some people can't? Why is it that Aussie man is not experiencing what the guy on the camera is experiencing? And then the question is it realistic? So the thing I want to illustrate is that the energetic traditions of the world are based on the use of the third eye. All the third senses, but mostly the third eye. Because the third eye is tied to the sixth sense of the mind. This is the sixth sense in the Taoist Buddhist tradition. Right? Of course, scientifically we now know there's 8 senses, but or more, but we say 8 primary senses. But when we say the sixth sense, we mean here the mind itself, and the third eye is tied to it. So when there is a conjuring of mental imagery of the chi, or of the golden flower, or of Tao Te, there is first a need to be able to utilize that third eye. If the person has not opened their third eye, or does not have an intuitive connection to it, it will be very difficult for them to use energy technologies, bar none. They could go to acupuncture, several times. It will be very difficult. Now, if you can get them to open that channel, then it'll be different. My father, I needled my father for years, and it wasn't until recently, and one day he was like laying there and he goes, something was moving around. It's like, what do you think? That's what you're supposed to be doing. Is this the first time? It was the first time he'd ever felt the chi. And it took him a while to break down whatever barriers it was to him sensing the chi in that way. And then he was able to sense the chi moving about. And the following treatment after that, big flow. And it was, from then on, it was a different experience for him. I had another guy who was a similar element build. He was a metal element. Very, left brain, everything super logical. And I opened up his third eye, and he totally went the opposite direction. He became very open, studying lots of different metaphysical concepts. And so it is an absolute imperative for anybody that wants to understand this technology. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be an objective observational result. Absolutely. Take Chinese medicine. There needs to be an objective observational result. My acupuncture, this is not bragging, but my acupuncture is just simply more effective than the practitioners who do not connect to chi in that way. If they cannot connect to chi, they will not be able to truly move the energy in the patient. So we need to find an objective truth, but within that we must understand that this technology is based upon an etheric level. And it's the same in India too, right? So there's an etheric level, and that is absolutely vital to understanding how to utilize these technologies, whether it's like with my feng shui client I just did, or whatever, So secondly, because there is something happening, and we are trying to measure this efficaciousness. We're trying to decide how realistic it is. We need to also recognize some of the fundamental rules of the Qi from these traditions that they state, or that are unstated but they're true nonetheless. One of those unstated rules is that you need to build up the energy. Another unstated rule is that you have to penetrate with your mind through the psychic barriers, whether they're your protective psychic barrier or the collective psychic barrier, which can be dangerous, by the way, and I'll elaborate in a second. You have to penetrate through that layer into another layer, and in that you can experience change, even miraculous change. And it's real. It's a measurable result. Whereas before this didn't happen, now this happens. Something like that. So, for example, I had a patient. She was for fertility. She herself was into like psychiatry, psychology. She was not into anything as I do, and we got into a good rapport, and she finally opened up, and she was a lot happier person. And then I was moving the Qi, and I did the Fa Qi, and I pulled a string of energy that had been stuck. It was in her kidney, and I pulled it out, and when I pulled the plug, bloop, like that, she felt a chill go through her entire body. She could see, her eyes were open, there was no needles anymore, right? But she could see that as I'm moving my hands, and bloop, and then she felt the change all throughout her body. She felt light and buoyant and totally different. So this is a person who would normally have a psychic barrier to that kind of technology. And then secondly, I had to provide the objective reality, the objective proof that something is happening. And in this case, objective because her subjective is separated by a spatial barrier from my subjective. Although realistically in a mystical tradition there isn't really a true barrier there, but it's still, on some scientific level, there's a space, there's a gap, right, between my hand and her skin, and certainly the kidney. And so she has a reaction, and now she is entering into that layer, and she's experiencing it on a different layer, on a different level. Does that make sense? So when that happens, we see a result that seems fantastical, miraculous, but to the outside, if you were to record this incident, it would be different. And now, let me illustrate this. Like somebody's going to say, well, this is bull hockey. That's fine. I don't necessarily need you to agree. Let's do it a different way. Have you ever been a part of a joke, like an inside joke, but when you tell it again, it makes no sense at all? It's almost embarrassing to tell the joke because the words, maybe they were off-color joke, dirty joke. Maybe it was just contextual and it didn't involve like that person, so they have no way to connect to it, and you're telling it like, oh, yeah, this is how it happened, right? That's an example of being of different layered barriers. Another example would be when you witness a violent incident. For example, you see like the guy who accidentally, but still it's manslaughter, choked to death the other guy outside the movie theater. His wife was a deputy, so I guess he felt like he had the right. And the other guy, his only crime that we know of objectively is that he had been peeing in public. Now, we all know he was probably being a punk about it when they had confronted him, and then an altercation ensued. However, when you watch the video, there is a certain lack of it. It's almost like kind of there's a dead space to the video because the man's just laying on him. He's not getting up. He's not responding to people's pleas. There's not much emotion being demonstrated, but in reality, the man underneath is dying. And so internally, as you watch it, you're experiencing this with horror. But when you watch it, it's very still. And yet on site, it was extremely intense emotions that were flying around. Even fear and probably the cold. Probably a lot of people were going cold by then. And clearly this man, who happened to be white, killing this black man for peeing in public, did not recognize the energy in the moment of where he was at. So now you can recognize through your intention, despite the stillness of the video, which you can go look up, and then empathize with the horror that must be occurring that is strangely being suppressed by the lack of energy movement and empathy within the person who is doing the choking. These are various indications of psychic barriers of which you can, on different levels, pass through. And on one day, you might be able to see it from one point of view, and on a different day, you might have a different opinion. Especially if you know facts, like if the guy took a swing at him, if he pulled a knife, there might be things that change your perspective, and then sort of a way, your channel into understanding what is happening there. And what I'm indicating is that these religious practices are just such a situation. In Bali, they have a tradition where young females dress up and they do a very long night dance, and there's a whole ritual that goes about. Now, it's a Hindu practice, comes down from a Hindu practice. And from an outsider's perspective, you're a foreigner watching something, you're engaging in it on an entertainment level, possibly on an academic study level, but not, like, you are not one of the people in the audience that are participating, who are feeling empathetically what is happening and what the significance of that is. And yet, the in-between layer between those people's experience and your experience when you get into it, because when you first see it, you're going, wow, this is strange. But when you get into it, you're going, wow, this is really entertaining. This is some cool stuff. And then you hear that it's going to last all night long, and you go, well, I'm tuning out. And when you tune out, when you look at it, it just looks like people behaving weirdly. And you're sitting there going, well, why are they dancing around? Is that really doing anything? And then the skeptical side of you shuts off the flow. And what I'm arguing is that is multidimensionality. That is the transdimensional experience between the religious experience and the secular experience. And that secular experience has its science, and the religious experience has its science. They both have an empirical a series of experiments over many years to attain evidential data. However, in one case, it seems difficult to believe from the other one. And in the other case, for the religious, the secular point of view seems completely untenable in the face of all the subjective evidence and the fact that if you're a spiritual person, you've experienced those spiritual things. If you've seen a ghost, you saw that ghost. If you felt the ghost, you felt the ghost. You don't need a scientific explanation because you were there. You felt it, you saw it, and so, but then there's the other side of going, it wasn't a weather balloon. And that's true. How do you know? I mean, you have to step through these things and achieve the best. Now, back to answering our question, what can it do for us, if anything, in this modern times? What I think that is being really indicated here is that first of all, the mind has a quantum computer of sorts, has access. It's very clear from the movements of the Taoist priest that he's accessing different mental structures inside of his brain, right? He's accessing parts of his body, and he's actually working up energies in his body as well. He's probably actually got there's probably a measurable chemical pheromone release. There's probably a change in his nervous system, things that could be objectively identified. We could probably put an fMRI and see which regions he activates, and we can determine methods of repeating that state. However, what I'm also saying is that there is a quantum realm of which the human mind has access to, and we are not understanding it. And right now I can tell you, go and Google rainbow bodies. There are instances, very fascinating instances of the rainbow body stories. There are unbelievable things, truly, but then there are objective things. There are rocks that have been vitrified when people put their palm on the rock after meditating into the rainbow body, and they melted the rock and vitrified it with electricity. And I myself, and my wife can confirm this, frequently meditate and leave small sub-first degree burns on the skin that last, right? They're not pressure indentations. I can take a shower and I get out and they're still there, even a half hour later. Of my actual hand, you can see the fingers on the skin. So there is something there that's happening, and it's measurable. And the question is, can we use that? Should we use that? But can we use it in a reliable manner? And my answer is yes, and that we probably should be looking at it because it probably is related to the cure of things like cancer and AIDS and ADHD and how do we access and defeat bullyism in a kid, without medicating the kid, or ADHD, these other types of things. So I want you to think about those things. Let me know what you think below. Like, share, subscribe, tell everybody. Do whatever you like. But comment below and let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next video.